Jacob and his wife had been married for 13 years. It wasn't until she was undergoing surgery and publicly called out her lover Riley's name, even getting intimate with him in front of Jacob, that Jacob discovered she had been cheating on him for a long time. She and her best friend concocted lies to try and cover it up. Jacob, soft-hearted, gave her a chance, only to then catch her pregnant and planning for the child to acknowledge Riley as the father. Jacob's heart completely died. He pretended to forgive her to gather evidence, during which he found out he had stomach cancer. Even then, his wife was still putting on an act. Eventually, Jacob filed for divorce and went abroad for treatment. She pursued him, causing a scene, and shot and wounded Jacob's high school classmate. She was ultimately killed by the police, and Riley was left paralyzed from the waist down by her, unable to have children for the rest of his life. The originally noisy hospital room fell into an eerie silence because of Nova's words, and her group of close friends each looked embarrassed, not daring to meet Jacob's gaze. Jacob's gaze swept across their faces, and he understood everything they all knew about Riley. Jacob suddenly felt like a clown, especially his blissful expression from moments before in their eyes, which must have seemed both pathetic and amusing. Someone stammered an explanation. Oliver, don't mind her. Science under anesthesia. She's just talking nonsense. The others immediately chimed in. That's right, everyone knows Zion is a Daniel. She loves you so much she must be talking nonsense. Exactly, Riley is just Zion's secretary. How could he compare to your place in her heart, Oliver? Someone nudged that person's arm, signaling her to shut up. Jacob said nothing, only feeling that his feet, which had been soaking in cold water for over 4 hours, were numb with cold, and Nova was still shouting, Jacob James. Jacob James, Aurora quickly called Jacob James. A hint of grievance gradually emerged in her voice, filled with concern. Didn't he say H always be with Jacob? Why isn't he here yet? Without his abs, Jacob can't sleep. Jacob's hand gripping Nova's trembled slightly as he asked, Nova, who is Jacob? Nova looked at Jacob fuzzily, and after a long moment, uttered 3 words, loser. Jacob's heart twisted in pain, and his nose burned. So, they had fallen in love in high school, from 17 to 30, and all these years Jacob had been utterly devoted to her, fulfilling her every wish. Yet, in her eyes, all this was merely a display of a loser. How ridiculous. How tragic. Finally, Jacob picked up Nova's phone and called her secretary, Riley. When Riley rang, he completely ignored Jacob. He cupped Nova's face and said, voice filled with concern, Jabe, I'm sorry, Jacob is late. You've suffered. Nova instantly smiled, her eyes crinkling, and she hugged him, saying, James, you're finally here. Someone just impersonated you. But Jacob isn't an idiot. How could Jacob not recognize Jacob's own James? Jacob told him to get lost. Riley smugly glanced at Jacob, then coaxed Nova like a child. Jacob's wife is amazing. Nova pointed to her mouth and said, aren't you going to reward your wife with a kiss? Then, the two began kissing as if no one else was there, watching the scene. Jacob felt a bitter taste in his throat, and a wave of fury surged within him. Even as Jacob desperately dug his nails into his thigh, he still couldn't stop trembling and feeling cold. Her best friend Aurora said softly, unable to bear it, Oliver, why don't you go back first? Zion will surely explain everything properly once she wakes up. Explain. The two of them were practically live streaming giving birth in front of Jacob. What else was there to explain? It was ironic that just half an hour ago, Nova, in Jacob's eyes, was still a perfect wife, the Daniel. A source of pride Jacob would mention everywhere he went. 13 years of loving companionship. They had never once quarreled, because Jacob tolerated her. She cared for Jacob, and they were like a perfectly matched souls. So, the moment she crumbled, Jacob's heart was rocked by a violent earthquake, and Jacob was destined to be shattered in that earthquake. Jacob silently got up and left the hospital room. The moment he stepped out the door, Jacob heard Nova's group of friends sigh in relief, as if they had sent away a pain that suffocated them. Apparently, at some point, both Nova and her friends had excluded Jacob from their circle. The sleepless night, his dreams were filled with the 13 years of memories with Jacob and Nova, the pain making Jacob gasp for breath. He didn't know when he started running a fever. Jacob felt hot and stuffy all over, struggling to wake up, yet unable to open his eyes. Just when Jacob thought he was going to die, he felt someone touch his forehead, calling him James anxiously. Jacob had no strength to respond, only tears flowing freely. Only in his dreams dared Jacob cry so uninhibitedly, unafraid of being mocked for weakness. When Jacob fully regained consciousness, he saw Nova sitting by the bed, looking utterly exhausted. Jacob hadn't expected to see Nova upon opening his eyes. Jacob had thought last night was a dream, so for a moment, Jacob couldn't quite react, just staring blankly at her. Seeing Jacob awake, Nova excitedly grasped Jacob's hand and asked, James, how are you feeling now? Jacob pulled his hand from her grasp and coldly asked, is it James? Or loser? Nova's face turned pale, with red-rimmed eyes. She slapped herself and said, I'm sorry. Jacob was really just confused from the anesthesia yesterday. Jacob didn't know Jacob would do something so foolish. After Jacob fully sobered up, Jacob felt both regret and fear. Jacob was afraid he'd leave Jacob, so even though the doctor didn't allow Jacob to be discharged, Jacob left anyway. With that, she struggled to get up and lifted her shirt. She had undergone an appendectomy, and now, blood was already seeping through the gauze. Jacob recalled her staying by his side all night, and his heart softened a little. Looking at her grieved eyes, Jacob thought perhaps it was true, perhaps she wasn't truly beyond saving. Maybe she had just developed a liking for a lively, cheerful young man. But that liking was far from her feelings for Jacob, so, as long as she could extinguish that feeling in time, they could still go back to how things were. But just thinking about them kissing in front of everyone last night, Jacob felt a lump in his throat and a profound unease in his heart. Nova seemed to know what Jacob was thinking. She leaned in, kissing Jacob's face while sobbing. James, do you despise Jacob for being unclean? Then Jacob will go shower. Jacob will have someone remove a layer of skin from Jacob's lips. Okay, please don't dislike Jacob. Jacob truly loves you. Besides you, Jacob wants no one else. Jacob doesn't know why Jacob acted like this after the anesthesia. Jacob already fired Riley overnight, regardless. What he did last night clearly shows he had improper intentions towards Jacob. The kind of man who knowingly intrudes on a marriage with such low morals, Jacob would never be interested in him. She paused, then said earnestly, you also know how much Jacob detests such cheating men and women. How could Jacob possibly do such a thing? Jacob looked at the earnest Nova, thinking of her past. Her mother had committed suicide due to a mental breakdown after her father cheated. So she utterly hated infidelity and even refused to collaborate with some people with questionable ethics because of it. Besides, if she truly had someone else in her heart, why would she have always been so good to Jacob? Thinking this, Jacob decided to give her another chance. She joyfully hugged Jacob, tears pouring down his neck and soaking into his skin. The scalding hot tears hitting Jacob's back felt like a tranquilizer pouring into Jacob's heart as Jacob hugged her back, gently saying, River, don't lie to Jacob, or you'll lose your Evelyn. Evelyn was Jacob's nickname, and the name she once loved to call Jacob the most. Her body stiffened slightly, but the next moment she said with utmost certainty, Jacob's Evelyn, rest assured your Lucas will never betray you. And just like that, they reconciled. Nova was even kinder to Jacob than before. She started turning down busy social engagements, waiting for Jacob downstairs at his company on time, going to the market with Jacob, and then coming back to cook together in the kitchen. She would send afternoon treats to the people at Jacob's company, asking them to be nice to Jacob. His colleagues all praised Jacob for his skill in managing his wife and asked Jacob for his secret recipe. But compared to the pride and confidence Jacob used to feel when talking about their relationship, now Jacob only offered a sheepish smile. The events of that night ultimately became Jacob's nagging doubt. A month later, Nova told Jacob she was pregnant. Jacob excitedly hugged her and spun her around a few times. At that moment, Jacob was truly grateful he hadn't given up on her because of an unexpected event. Jacob began selecting a suitable postpartum care facility for her and started studying parenting knowledge. Jacob was determined to become a qualified father, until Jacob saw Riley accompanying her for prenatal checkups, gently stroking her belly. His smile full of anticipation, Riley said, Jake, can you really bear for our child to call someone else dad? Nova chuckled and pinched his face. Are you jealous? Jacob didn't tell you. At Jacob's current worth, divorce isn't worth it. Don't worry, when the child is a little older, Jacob will tell him that you're his father. Our child will still call you dad. For the first time, Jacob realized that when you truly despise someone, it actually makes you nauseous enough to vomit. Jacob rushed to the trash can and vomited uncontrollably. Riley and Nova walked towards Jacob. Then Jacob, panic-stricken, hid behind the trash can. Jacob was clearly the victim. Jacob should have confronted them. Yet, Jacob was so afraid he dared not face any of it. It was as if he stepped out, Jacob would completely become a pitiful wretch no one wanted. Jacob heard Riley say hopefully, I truly hope it's a daughter in your belly. She'll be just like you. Jake, gentle yet strong, beautiful and generous. The thought of Jacob having to such girls makes Jacob feel bubbly with happiness. Nova giggled flirtatiously. You always say the sweetest things. Oh, right, how are your preparations for moving? Riley, Jake. Jacob doesn't want to go to Tiffany. Jacob just wants to stay here with you and Ari. Nova said seriously. No, you'll be discovered sooner or later if you stay here. Then, she softened her tone. Besides, Jacob will come to stay with you for half a month every month, using a business trip as an excuse. So you don't have to worry about not seeing Jacob. Riley wrapped his arms around her and kissed her hard, saying, That's great, Jacob loves you so much. Please don't leave Jacob, okay? Nova said earnestly. Of course Jacob loves you very much too. I'm just putting you through a lot. Riley, Jacob isn't put out at all. Being your man is the happiest thing in Jacob's life. The two chatted and laughed as they drove away. Jacob trembled as he stood up, his vision already blurred by tears. Jacob never imagined Nova had been deceiving Jacob all along. Had Jacob not felt unwell and come to the hospital for a checkup, Jacob would never have stumbled upon them. Otherwise, Jacob would probably still be like a fool, being led around by her. Jacob came home very late. During that time, Nova had called Jacob dozens of times, but Jacob didn't answer any of them. The moment Jacob walked in, she rushed over and embraced Jacob, her eyes full of worry. "James, where have you been? Do you know Jacob was going crazy looking for you?" Jacob said. Jacob went to the hospital. Nova instantly tensed up. She looked at Jacob, cautiously asking, "When did you go? Which hospital did you go to? Why didn't you call Jacob to come along?" Jacob City Central Hospital. Jacob's stomach wasn't feeling well. Nova breathed a sigh of relief. They had gone to Riverbend Women's Health Center. She asked with concern, "What's wrong with your stomach?" Jacob replied dismissively, "Nothing, just a little indigestion." She smiled and said, "That's good then." Jacob looked at her sweet smiling face. She paused for a moment, then said, "Actually," Jacob thought about it. "Jacob doesn't think we're suited to have a child right now. How about we just let this one go?" Nova was somewhat surprised. Her face turned cold, and she instinctively shielded her belly, angrily asking, "Are you even speaking like a human? We've been together for 13 years. And this child is Jacob's long-awaited. How can you just say you don't want him? How can you be so cruel? Are you seeing someone else?" Jacob looked at the face he had loved for 13 years. Her gaze at Jacob now was like looking at an enemy. Jacob suddenly felt ridiculous. What was Jacob expecting? To actually think she would choose Jacob over Jacob and this child? That was, after all, her child was the man she loved most. What was Jacob to her anyway? Jacob only felt agonizing pain. He had given her the last chance, and since she had made her choice, it was time for them to end things. But now was not the time to confront her. Jacob said blandly, "Just pretend Jacob was talking nonsense. Jacob's tired. Jacob's going to rest." Jacob walked around Nova and headed towards the room, but she hugged Jacob tightly from behind and whispered, "James, what's wrong? Haven't you forgiven Jacob yet?" Jacob shook his head. "No. Jacob is just afraid Jacob won't be a good father." She sighed in relief and smiled. "How could that be? You're studying parenting knowledge so diligently. You'll definitely be the best dad in the world. It's his good fortune to have you as his father, and he must be very excited to come into this world and meet you." Hearing that, Jacob felt utterly disgusted. Jacob practically gritted his teeth and said, "Really, Jacob is looking forward to it too," pushing her hand away. Jacob feigned exhaustion and retreated into the room. That night, Nova called Jacob for dinner, but Jacob pretended to be fast asleep. She sat by the bed, watching Jacob for a long time, then quietly left. Soon after, Jacob heard her phone ring, and then she left the house. Jacob immediately got up and quietly followed her. Jacob saw Nova pick up Riley by the roadside in her car, and the two drove all the way to Jacob's first house, which was Jacob's our first home. Jacob's hands on the steering wheel began to tremble. The feeling of chest tightness, shortness of breath, and intense nausea and vomiting became increasingly severe. Jacob hadn't expected Nova to let Riley live in Jacob's our first home. One must know, Jacob had bought that house by selling the Skylar left by his parents, plus the money earned from countless late nights and hard-won deals. It was Jacob's wedding gift to her, their first home. Although it wasn't large and Elijah was just average, its significance was extraordinary. Even after she successfully started her own business and they owned numerous properties, the house had never been sold. Nova said it wasn't just a house, but a testament to Jacob's sincere love for her. But now, she had turned it into a love nest for her and another man, brazenly trampling on the Jacob who had once loved her with all his heart. At this moment, Jacob finally felt completely disheartened. Jacob sat in his car downstairs all night, as if punishing himself for his past naivety. Only by witnessing her settling down in that house and entangling with that man could Jacob truly break free from this relationship. Early the next morning, Nova came downstairs looking refreshed, with Riley by her side. As she was about to leave, Riley pulled her back and passionately kissed her. She used to be such a shy person, but now, downstairs in a busy area, she was passionately kissing a man in public, her face intoxicated with pleasure. This wanton display made Jacob sick to his stomach. After the kiss, Riley squatted down to tie her shoelace, while she took out her phone to send a message. Jacob's phone rang. It was her message. The company had an urgent contract issue come up. Jacob had been busy until now, and probably won't be home until tonight. Take care of yourself. Eat on time. Your loving wife. That nauseating feeling surged again. Jacob tried hard to suppress it, but still couldn't help but vomit. A sharp pain shot through his stomach. Jacob trembled from the pain, an ominous premonition stirring within him. Nova drove away, and Riley hummed a tune as he went upstairs. Jacob took a while to recover, only getting out of the car once he could tolerate the sharp stomach pain. Jacob knocked on the door. Riley opened the door with a smile, muttering, "Did I forget something again?" The last word dragged on as he saw Jacob. Jacob looked at him coldly, expecting him to be scared or guilty. Unexpectedly, he simply brazenly sized Jacob up and down, smiling maliciously. Saying Jacob wondered who it was. Turns out, his sister's neither youthful nor dispensable loser, isn't it? Since you found this place, why don't you come in and take a look? He stepped aside, inviting Jacob in. He acted like the man of the house, as if Jacob were the illicit third party. Jacob's chest heaved, but his heart felt as if it had died. Jacob numbly walked inside, into what Jacob had believed to be Jacob and Nova's happiest little home. And there, he saw pairs of everyday items. The slippers were matching pairs, the pajamas were couple sets. And even the toothbrushes could be fitted together to form a heart pattern. Riley didn't follow Jacob. He didn't even bother to provoke Jacob further. Just lazily sat on the sofa and lit a cigarette. He said, Jacob should thank you. Actually, before, Jacob had to work, but not anymore. Sister was afraid Yao would find Jacob, so she simply started keeping him like a kept man, paying to support Jacob. Now Jacob doesn't have to do anything but make her happy every day. And Jacob gets tons of cash. This life is truly amazing. Jacob glared at him with resentment. He challenged Jacob. Don't look at Jacob like that. What, do you still want to go confront sister about it? Do you believe Jacob or not? Even if you go make a scene in front of her now, she won't be scared. Because when you chose to forgive her last time, she knew you couldn't leave her. Even if she cheated, even if she's pregnant with Jacob's child, you'll still swallow your pride. After all, at your age, even if you divorce, where would you find a wife who earns as much as her? Rich women wouldn't be interested in a John like you. John, Jacob was only 30. How could he be a John? Riley ignored Jacob's anger and continued. Jacob knows you look down on Jacob. But Jacob, we're all the same. Same. Jacob felt as if he was spitting blood. Jacob wanted to rush up and kill him. Jacob and Nova met when they were young, for her entrepreneurial dream. Jacob toiled day and night, working overtime constantly. It's true she started from scratch, but was her startup capital the result of Jacob's countless late nights and hard-won deals? Why did Riley think Jacob was the same as him? But he was so confident. So confident that Jacob didn't even need to doubt it to be sure. Nova had told him all of this. Perhaps Jacob was wrong from the start. Jacob forgave Nova because Jacob loved her. But in her eyes, yet Jacob forgave her for personal gain. But this man, this decade-plus relationship, had long since become a festering swamp of lies and deceit in her increasingly inflated social status. Foul-smelling, utterly deadly, Jacob walked straight past Riley, his heels clicking as he entered the living room, where he saw a huge wedding photo hanging on the wall. In the wedding photo, Nova, wearing a diamond-studded wedding dress, nestled delicately in Riley's arms, with the famous Skylar in the background. An aura of wealth and extravagance permeated the air. Jacob thought his heart had turned to ashes. But seeing this photo, his heart uncontrollably ached again, and his neck felt as if it were being choked, the suffocating sensation making Jacob feel dizzy. Here used to haunt Jacob and Nova's wedding photo, unlike the extravagance of their wedding photo. Back then Jacob and Nova were poor. To save money for her startup fund, they didn't even splurge on the cheapest package. They just found a random beach with white clothes, a veil, and a camera. And that was their wedding photo. Jacob tried to calm himself down, took out his phone, and snapped a picture of the wedding photo. Just now, Jacob had finally figured something out. Rotten people, if they reek, should stay in the trash can. Nova and Riley had been living together for a long time, which already constituted a de facto marriage. Jacob was going to use the evidence to contact a lawyer and ensure that couple of scum got nothing. Riley saw Jacob taking a picture and finally panicked. He rushed over and snatched Jacob's phone. As Jacob dodged, he was kicked to the ground by Riley. He was right about one thing: Jacob's body was indeed not as good as his, especially when Jacob's stomach was hurting so badly. As Jacob fell, his head hit the coffee table hard. In an instant, as Jacob felt dizzy, and blood flowed down his forehead, obscuring his vision. A flash of hatred crossed Riley's face. Jacob could feel that he wanted Jacob dead. Suddenly, with a click, the smart lock opened. Jacob looked up, and it was Nova, who had returned. When she saw the scene, the smile in her eyes instantly gave way to immense panic. Riley finally showed a panicked expression too, withdrawing his foot, but then, playing the victim, said, "Sister," he said, "ruin us and beat Jacob. Luckily, Jacob is strong, otherwise, Jacob would be lying here." But Nova just pushed him away fiercely, nervously kneeling beside Jacob. Her eyes red, saying, "James, what happened to you? James, don't be afraid. Jacob will take you to the hospital now." When Jacob woke up, Nova's drawn face was the first thing he saw. Her eyes were red at seeing Jacob awake. The tears flowed before she could speak, and she choked out, "James, you scared Jacob to death." Beside her, Aurora stood awkwardly. Jacob looked at her, thinking his convincing performance was truly exceptional, able to portray love so flawlessly. His stomach ached. She said softly, You have stomach cancer, but it's early stage. As long as you receive proper treatment, you can fully recover." Jacob felt as if he had been struck by lightning. Stomach cancer. God is truly unfair. Jacob clearly did nothing wrong. Yet Jacob has to suffer from this disease. Does even God think Jacob is a loser? That Jacob doesn't deserve to live in this world? Jacob scoffed, self-deprecatingly saying, why bother with treatment? If Jacob dies, won't you be able to be with your lover openly? Nova glanced at Aurora, and Aurora quickly said, Oliver, you misunderstood. Riley is actually Jacob's lover. All along, Zion had been covering for Jacob. When people are speechless, they truly can be speechless. Jacob had thought Nova would lie to Jacob, but Jacob never expected her to treat Jacob like an idiot. She knew this wasn't credible, so she quickly said, Jacob knows this is hard to believe, but you know Aurora is James. He's a paranoid man who will pull a knife on Aurora at the slightest provocation. Aurora is Jacob's good friend and once saved Jacob's life, so Jacob was just repaying her kindness. Aurora then took out her phone, which was filled with intimate photos of her and Riley. She said, Sister-in-law, Jacob, we really didn't lie to you. Recently James had been a bit suspicious of Jacob, so Jacob asked Zion to see Riley, hoping to persuade him to take the money and leave. Actually, Jacob wanted to break up with him a long time ago. Last time Zion was hospitalized, she was hallucinating from the anesthesia and thought she was Jacob. When Riley arrived, to anger Jacob, he went along with the misunderstanding. Jacob was afraid everyone would find out about Jacob's affair, so Jacob didn't explain any of this. When Riley saw that Jacob was truly not planning to divorce, he wanted to find a wealthier prospect. But Zion loves you so much, how could she give him a chance? Zion rejected him. But who knew he would so frantically try to drive a wedge between you two? After speaking, she knelt down in front of Jacob, slapping herself while saying, It's all Jacob's fault. Please, for the sake of Jacob saving Zion's life, spare Riley this time. Otherwise, Riley will go to James. And then Jacob will be killed by James. Nova grabbed her collar and slapped her several times, furiously saying, Enough, Aurora. Jacob is already so miserable because of your reckless affairs. How dare you ask James to let him go? Jacob quietly watched their convincing performance. He just thought how strange people could be. How could someone treat a man they loved for over a decade like a brainless idiot? Did she truly believe Jacob loved her so much that Jacob would willingly be blind and deaf? Or did she think Jacob was willing to be blind and deaf for her wealth? Jacob suddenly found all of it incredibly boring, not wanting to watch their act anymore. Jacob coldly ordered them out. You can leave. The two finally quieted down. They looked at Jacob cautiously. Jacob looked at Aurora and uttered one word, get out. Both of them quietly sighed in relief at the same time, because they knew Jacob had agreed to their request. After Aurora left, Nova, voice filled with concern, hugged Jacob and said, I'm sorry, James. Jacob is the one who let you down. If Jacob had known that helping Aurora with her covering for her would almost cost you your life, Jacob would never have helped her. With a numb heart, Jacob touched her face and forced himself to say, fighting back the nausea, don't say that being too emotional isn't your fault. Jacob saw Nova's body tremble. She was too guilty to meet Jacob's eyes. Jacob pretended not to notice. In the following days, she stayed by Jacob's side constantly, as if Jacob was truly the only one in her eyes, as if Riley truly had nothing to do with her. Jacob started posting on social media, showing off their affection, as if subtly asserting his ownership. Jacob knew that Nova would show a look of disdain every time she saw the posts. She thought Jacob had become the kind of kept husband who only wanted to draw nourishment from her love. Finally, Riley couldn't sit still. He actually ran to the hospital. Nova furiously asked, What are you doing here? Riley looked at her aggrievedly and said, Jacob came to apologize to Oliver. Nova, it was all a misunderstanding. Jacob already explained it to Oliver. You can leave. Riley shed to tears, then turned and quietly left. It must be said, a man's tears were a woman's stimulant. He was already handsome. And seeing Nova with tears in his eyes, the pathetic appearance made even Jacob, the man, feel a pang of pity for him. Within a minute, Nova couldn't sit still and said, Jacob will go get you some food. What do you want to eat? Jacob knew she was eager to see her little lover, so he said whatever and watched her rush off. Jacob stood by the window in the hallway, indifferently watching Nova and Riley passionately kissing downstairs. Feeling nothing inside, perhaps he had truly let go. Jacob took out his phone and silently recorded everything, then turned to go back to the room, only to meet Grace's beautiful, striking almond-shaped eyes. Grace was Jacob's high school classmate, and she was Jacob's attending physician. She was also the female classmate who used to have a crush on Jacob. At that moment, she had a dark expression, saying, Disappointed, she's completely rotten, and you still want to love her. Jacob smiled without speaking. Looking at Jacob's pale face, she ultimately couldn't bring herself to say anything more. Sighing, go back and lie down on the bed. Nova returned 2 hours later. At this time, Grace was packing up the meal boxes. Nova was slightly startled, looking at her with hostility. Grace, what are you doing here? Grace said calmly. Jacob is Alexander's attending physician and his good friend. Is there a problem with Jacob visiting him after work and bringing him some food? Nova looked at Jacob guiltily. She said she was going to get food but made Jacob wait for 2 hours, without even sending Jacob a single message during that time. Nova quickly explained. Jacob remembered you love Alice's seafood porridge. His restaurant is popular. Jacob waited in line for a long time to get it. Jacob didn't expect you had already eaten. Her tone even carried a hint of resentment, as if blaming Jacob for eating someone else's food. Jacob couldn't be bothered to expose her and said blandly, since this porridge took so long to get, it shouldn't go to waste. Let Dr. Grace drink it. She's been so busy for Jacob. It wouldn't be right not to give her anything in return. Grace immediately walked over and took the meal box from Nova's hand, smiling. In that case, thank you very much. Then, she turned to Jacob and smiled. Jacob will come see you again tomorrow. Jacob nodded. Nova blocked Jacob's view and said discontentedly, when did her relationship with you get so good? Jacob said blandly, you're overthinking it. Jacob and I are just good friends. Nova's face still looked displeased. Jacob knew she was jealous. In the past, Jacob would have explained and comforted her properly, but now Jacob didn't even want to look at her face. Jacob said, you've been quite tired lately, so don't stay here to accompany me. Go back and rest. Nova quickly said, how can that be? You can't be alone. She paused, then said, besides, Jacob is going on a business trip tomorrow and probably won't see you for several days. Jacob must stay with you tonight. Business trip? Jacob smiled slightly and said blandly, since you're going on a business trip, it's even more important to get good rest. Jacob is fine now. Jacob can manage alone. Nova hesitated for a moment, finally nodding when her phone rang. She stayed with Jacob until 9 in the evening before returning home. Before leaving, she seemed to sense something. Touching Jacob's cold hand and looking at the dispirited Jacob, she said, Ari. Jacob asked the doctor, the surgery isn't very difficult. After you recover, let's go traveling. Okay, Jacob calmly said, okay. She could tell Jacob's perfunctory response but thought Jacob was just having trouble accepting the fact of his cancer, so she kissed Jacob's face and left. But she didn't know that they had no future. The next morning, when Grace came to see Jacob, Jacob was watching a video that Jacob had commissioned a private investigator to take for Jacob. In the video, Nova was hugging Riley downstairs, and someone was packing their things. Today, Riley was moving to another city. Nova's so-called business trip was to accompany him. Grace took Jacob's phone, glaring at Jacob somewhat angrily. You enjoy tormenting yourself this much, don't you? With that, she arranged the food and admonished Jacob. Your most important task right now is to recover your health and prepare for surgery. Nothing is more important than your own well-being. Jacob smiled and said, thank you, but you don't have to keep coming to see Jacob. Jacob can order takeout if Jacob gets hungry. She stopped what she was doing, looked up at Jacob, her eyes showing a hint of hurt. Do you find Jacob annoying? Jacob shook his head. Jacob just didn't want to owe her anything. Grace smiled in her striking almond-shaped eyes full of gentle amusement. She said, as long as Jacob doesn't find Jacob annoying, that means Jacob still has a chance. Jacob buried his head in his food, pretending not to understand her words. Jacob never imagined that after all these years Grace still liked Jacob. But what right did Jacob have? He was just a good-for-nothing who couldn't even keep his wife and whose body was failing. Grace left soon after. Before she left, she told Jacob she had several surgeries, but she had already instructed Stephanie at home to send Jacob meals. She also said to consider her, to give her a chance. But as soon as she left, Jacob immediately went to handle his discharge papers. Jacob dared not look at Grace's disappointed eyes, but Jacob even less wanted to give her false hope. Besides, it was time for some things to come to an end. After being discharged, Jacob returned home. He quickly printed and signed the divorce papers, copied the footage of Nova's infidelity onto an Elijah, placed it on the agreement, and then headed to the company. On Jacob's second day in the hospital, Jacob tendered Jacob's resignation to Ashley, but Ashley refused to accept it. Jacob and Nova moved in the same circles, and Jacob had heard whispers about Nova and Riley's affair, even subtly warning Jacob about it once. Back then, however, Jacob was so certain that Jacob's Evelyn would never let Jacob down. Jacob didn't take Jacob's words seriously. Now, facing Jacob, Jacob felt nothing but profound embarrassment. Ashley asked Jacob if Jacob was truly willing to throw away years of hard work, all for one woman. Jacob, naturally, wasn't willing to let it all go, so Jacob ultimately accepted Ashley's advice, deciding to go overseas to head up a newly opened subsidiary and undergo surgery there at the same time. Jacob's return date was undecided. Jacob's parents had passed away years ago, and there was nothing left for Jacob to cling to in Lucas. Jacob left in a hurry. By 9 that evening, Jacob was already on a plane headed overseas. By the time Jacob arrived overseas, it was 2 in the morning Willow time. As soon as the plane touched down, Jacob received a call from Grace on the other end of the line. Her voice sounded low. Are Jacob trying to avoid Jacob? Jacob replied, no. Jacob just needed a change of scenery. Zoe, You're talented and truly kind-hearted. You deserve someone better, Grace responded. But in Jacob's eyes, you're already the best. Where would Jacob find anyone better? Jacob said, there are countless galaxies in this world. Grace's voice was deep and resolute, but Jacob only wants one Evelyn. Her bold and direct confession left Jacob speechless. Before Jacob could respond, she cut Jacob off, saying, Jacob won't give up. Jacob went to your company. Ashley told Jacob you might be back in 2 years, and Jacob will wait for you. If Jacob can't wait for you, Jacob will come find you. After hanging up, Jacob's heart was pounding. It hadn't beaten with such vigor in a long time. Over the next few days, Nova didn't contact Jacob, presumably dedicating all Nova's time to Riley. A week later, as Jacob was leaving the new office, Jacob was surprised to see Nova standing at the company's main entrance. Seeing Jacob, Nova immediately rushed over and hugged Jacob tightly. Nova's body trembled. As if from fear or excitement, Nova held Jacob like a precious object Nova had lost and found again, pleading, James, Jacob is sorry. Jacob was wrong. Don't leave Jacob. Jacob's voice was calm and Nova. Jacob thought Nova understood what Jacob meant. Nova's body stiffened slightly. But Nova didn't respond. Instead, Nova put on a pitiful act, saying, James, Jacob hasn't eaten in over 24 hours. Jacob, home. Let's go home and talk over a meal. Okay, Jacob. Jacob is craving your chicken noodle soup. Home. Jacob smiled. The home Jacob is talking about is at the mansion given to Jacob as a birthday gift, or the modest house Jacob gave Jacob as a wedding present. Too bad. Either way, Jacob is now in a foreign country, living in company housing, with no home to speak of. Jacob pushed Nova away. Nova's eyes were red as Nova looked at Jacob, like an abandoned kitten. But Nova was the one who abandoned Jacob first. What right did Nova have to look like that? Jacob was enraged by Nova's demeanor. Jacob said coldly, Nova, how do Nova have the nerve to follow Jacob here? That Elijah was Jacob's warning to Nova. Nova should know that, shouldn't Nova? If Nova is willing to part amicably, then sign the divorce agreement a month from now. Jacob will naturally return to Lucas to finalize the divorce with Nova. But if Nova refuses, Jacob won't hesitate to destroy Nova. Jacob himself, perhaps sensing the earnestness in Jacob's voice, Nova's face registered profound hurt. Nova asked Jacob, can Jacob really do it? Do Jacob know how much Jacob sacrificed to get Jacob where Jacob is today? Jacob scoffed, so Nova is aware. Touching Nova's belly, Nova said with red eyes, and Jacob still has a child. For the baby's sake, Jacob interrupted Nova with disgust. Is this Jacob's child? Nova, Jacob is not a fool. Nova's face fell. Nova whispered, Jacob is sorry. But Jacob does love Jacob. Jacob just wanted a child of Jacob's own so desperately. Jacob had trouble conceiving. Then Jacob thought it was your body that had an issue. So Jacob wanted to try with someone else. You refused to join Jacob's company, afraid people would say you built your career by relying on Jacob. So you don't know that every time Jacob attended a social event, they would ask why Jacob didn't have children. As time went on, Jacob began to long for a child. Otherwise, what's the point of working so hard and earning so much money? Jacob needs someone to carry on Jacob's company. Do you understand? But Jacob never thought of divorcing you. Jacob will always love you. You'll always be Nova's James in everyone's eyes. Looking at this woman Jacob had loved for over a decade, Jacob felt utterly disgusted. It turned out that in Nova's eyes, simply reserving the title of James for Jacob was enough to honor Jacob's feelings. Jacob scoffed. Jacob doesn't have children. Isn't it because you wanted to focus on your career? So Jacob always took precautions. The only time Jacob didn't use protection, it seems, was at your insistence. You said you were in your safe period, but actually, at that time, you had already slept with Riley and hadn't used protection. You were afraid of getting pregnant, so you made preparations early. Is Jacob right? Nova's face went pale. Nova shook Nova's head guiltily. No, that's not it. Jacob said calmly, you know whether it is or not. If you truly want to start over, then terminate the pregnancy, and Jacob can have a child of Jacob's own. How about that? Nova frowned, looking at Jacob as if Jacob were a stranger. But that's a life, James. How could Jacob even suggest a mother lose her child? Jacob smiled and slapped Nova. This is Nova's truth, isn't it? Don't worry. Jacob just wanted to make Nova sick. There's no way Jacob would reconcile with Nova, let alone let Nova, a slut, give birth to Jacob's child. After all, Nova doesn't genuinely want to avoid divorce. Nova just thinks that with Nova's current worth, a divorce isn't worth it. Every time Jacob spoke, Nova's face grew paler. Nova took a few steps back, muttering haltingly, You heard everything. So, you already knew Jacob and Aurora were deceiving you. Jacob was amused. Yes, Jacob already knew you were treating Jacob like a fool. Nova started to speak again, but Jacob gazed at Nova with a cold and disgusted stare. Get out, Jacob spat. Aside from the day Jacob got married, Jacob never wants to see Nova again. With that, Jacob walked away. Nova tried to follow Jacob, but the security at Jacob's company housing was tight. and Nova was stopped at the gate. Jacob had thought Nova would give up, but to Jacob's surprise, Nova kept following Jacob. Even when Jacob ignored Nova, Nova didn't mind. Later, Nova actually went and terminated the pregnancy. Nova even said that once Jacob recovered, Nova would bear Jacob's child. Jacob felt that Nova probably saw Nova herself as a queen. And Jacob was nothing more than Nova's complete doormat. Nova's being able to give Jacob a child was considered a monumental favor. Jacob, thoroughly fed up, sent a recording of Nova's words to Riley. As a result, Riley flew over the next day. That day, Jacob finally agreed to have dinner with Nova, and Nova was so happy Nova practically bounced. For a moment, Jacob felt as if Jacob was seeing the girl who had once confessed Nova's feelings to Jacob. When Nova told Jacob Nova liked Jacob, Nova was so nervous Nova stammered. Nova's whole face flushed, especially the tips of Nova's ears, which were so red they looked like they might bleed. Nova's hand holding the rose kept trembling. When Jacob agreed, Nova jumped up and down the terrace in Nova's eyes under the golden glow of the sunset. Nova patted Nova's chest and solemnly promised Jacob, Evelyn, Jacob is from Lucas. Jacob will always protect you. Jacob believed that at that time, Nova truly loved Jacob, and truly thought Nova would love Jacob for a lifetime. It's just that life is too long enough to make someone barely recognizable. Jacob and Nova went to a nearby restaurant together. On the way, Nova kept reminiscing about the past, trying to remind Jacob of how Nova used to love Jacob, hoping Jacob would feel enough concern to forgive Nova. But when Nova saw Riley sitting in the restaurant, Nova froze like a gun that had misfired. Jacob's voice was calm. Let's eat together. Nova's face was cold as Nova rushed to Riley, grabbed Riley's wrist under Riley's aggrieved gaze, and tried to drag Riley out. Who allowed you to come here? Did you forget Jacob's instructions? Riley looked at Nova's flat belly and said with red eyes, Jade. So, Nova really terminated Jacob's pregnancy. Nova said angrily, that was always an ill-begotten child. Don't worry. Jacob will give you money, ensuring you're comfortable for the rest of your life. Now, get out of here. If you upset James, Jacob absolutely won't let you get away with it. Riley shook Riley's head. No, Jacob doesn't want money. Jacob wants you. Jade, Jacob truly loves you. Jacob is not with you just for your money. Jacob listened, amused. If Nova weren't such a major Ashley, with immense wealth, how would Riley, a handsome and intelligent graduate from a prestigious university, have fallen for a married woman like Nova? However, whether Riley's intentions were genuine or not, it was none of Jacob's business. Jacob turned to leave the chaotic scene. Nova grabbed Jacob, not allowing Jacob to leave. Nova's eyes were bloodshot, brimming with terror, and Nova's whole body trembled. Nova's frantic appearance startled Jacob. Jacob even suspected that if Jacob insisted on leaving, Nova would lose Nova's mind. In the midst of the struggle, Grace rushed in and slapped Nova across the face. Nova fell onto a nearby table and said fiercely, Grace, you really do have ill intentions towards James. Grace said coldly, Nova's James. The moment Nova was intimate with another man and conceived an ill-begotten child, Jacob ceased to be Nova's James. Nova said with a cold face, do you think you can win Jacob over? Saying that, Nova opened Nova's arms to Jacob, Nova's tone gentle. The obsession in Nova's as almost crazy. James, come to Jacob's side. Okay. You said that if Jacob terminates the pregnancy, you would give Jacob another child. Jacob felt Nova was treating Jacob like Nova's dog. Jacob said coldly, don't flatter Jacob's self. Nova, you don't love Jacob. Nova just can't accept that Nova, who loved Jacob so much, is now being cast aside. But Jacob truly no longer loves Nova. To Jacob, Nova is like a once precious toy that one day fell into a cesspit, becoming dirty and foul. It became something Jacob wanted to avoid. And Jacob didn't even want to throw it into the trash myself, because Jacob finds it disgusting. Do you understand? Nova burst into tears. It was the first time Nova had heard Jacob express Jacob's disgust towards Nova so directly. Nova shook Nova's head and muttering to Nova herself, no, Jacob shouldn't be like this. James, Jacob loves Jacob. Jacob truly loves Jacob. Grace put Grace's arm around Jacob and said, Jacob, let's go. Jacob nodded and turned to leave with Grace. But then a gunshot rang out from behind them. Blood sprayed out from beside Jacob. Jacob looked at Grace in horror. At that moment, there was a hole in Grace's chest, and blood kept gushing out. Grace fell with a thud, looking at Jacob in agony. Run, run. People in the restaurant scattered in terror. Jacob angrily looked at the culprit, only to see Nova holding the gun. Nova's eyes filled with savagery and madness. Nova was about to fire again, but Jacob immediately threw Jacob's self over Grace, screaming, Nova, you lunatic, if you have the guts, kill Jacob. Nova. Nova's face paled and streaked with terror, looked at Jacob. James, Nova said, for Grace. Are you even willing to sacrifice Jacob's life? Beside Nova, Riley was trembling with fear. Riley tried to run, but Nova pointed the gun at Riley, yelling furiously, it's all your fault. If you hadn't seduced Jacob, Jacob wouldn't have made such a mistake. If Jacob kills you, James will forgive Jacob. Unfortunately, Nova's gunshot went wide. Riley, terrified, ran while cursing. Nova, you're a lunatic. If Jacob had known you were like this, Jacob wouldn't have touched you even for 10 million. You old hack, you washed up hack. Nova chased after Riley, however. Before leaving, Nova looked at Jacob with lingering desperation. Jacob won't give up. James, you will always be Jacob. Jacob had no time to deal with Nova, as Jacob was calling emergency services. After Jacob gave the address, a volley of gunshots suddenly rang out from outside. Jacob suddenly looked up, only to see Riley on the ground, clutching Riley's groin, blood flowing between Riley's legs. Nova lay in a pool of blood, gazing at Jacob from afar with wide-open eyes. Not far away were several police officers holding guns at that moment. Jacob's heart was a tangle of mixed emotions. Nova was dead. Riley had been hit in a vital area and would be impotent for the rest of Riley's life. Fortunately, Grace's wound had grazed Grace's heart, and after more than 10 hours of medical treatment, Grace pulled through. Grace was not yet out of danger. This incident quickly reached Lucas and attracted international attention. Ashley rushed to Ruby overnight, collaborating with the embassy to assist with the investigation there. Jacob remained by Grace's side until Grace was out of danger. Only then did Jacob make time to see Nova. When Jacob saw Nova lying lifelessly in the morgue, even though Jacob no longer loved Nova, Jacob still couldn't help but break down in tears. Jacob hadn't expected Nova to go to such extremes. Nova's heart was clearly already half given to someone else. Why couldn't Nova just part amicably with Jacob? Jacob held Nova's face, choked up. Nova, Jacob doesn't hate Nova anymore. In Nova's next life, love one person faithfully. And don't be fickle. After bidding farewell to Nova, Jacob returned to the hospital. 2 days later, Grace woke up. Seeing Grace open Grace's eyes, Jacob was overcome with emotion. Shedding tears, Grace managed a weak smile at Jacob, trying to raise Grace's hand to wipe away Jacob's tears. Jacob grabbed Grace's hand and held it to Jacob's face, saying, Jacob's eyes red and filled with guilt. Jacob is so sorry, truly sorry. Grace shook Grace's head at Grace's gaze as gentle as ever. Later, the embassy contacted Jacob, informing Jacob that because Nova had no gun license, illegally possessed a gun, and committed intentional homicide, the police were justified in shooting Nova according to Ruby's laws. Jacob understood this perfectly and immediately signed a waiver of liability. Unexpectedly, half a month later, Jacob was publicly shamed online, becoming a vicious captain and reviled by everyone. It turned out that because Jacob had become the sole heir to Nova's estate, and Riley's efforts were all for nothing, Riley harbored deep resentment towards Jacob and started spreading rumors online. Riley slandered Jacob, claiming Jacob cheated and drove Nova to madness, causing Nova to fly abroad in a rage and personally kill Nova's rival. A torrent of online abuse and attacks swept over Jacob like a tidal wave. Some even started calling for the police to arrest Jacob and extradite Jacob to Lucas to investigate whether Jacob had committed a crime. Not only was Jacob personally affected, but Jacob's company also faced a public boycott. Riley thought Jacob would be helpless. Riley sent Jacob a message, demanding half of the inheritance. Otherwise, Riley threatened to have people fly to Ruby to corner Jacob and Grace. It seemed Nova hadn't told Riley about Elijah, which made Riley believe Riley was in complete control. Jacob immediately uploaded all the videos Jacob had to the internet. Nova's so-called best friends also stepped forward, testifying on Jacob's behalf and solemnly apologizing to Jacob. After all, Jacob had now inherited all of Nova's property and was the person with the most authority in the company. They dared not offend Jacob. They even had to flatter Jacob. Public opinion completely turned around, and Riley became Taylor. Jacob, meanwhile, received countless apologies and words of comfort. Jacob ignored them. After posting the clarification video, Jacob focused on taking care of Grace. What Jacob hadn't expected was that Jacob's former high school classmates suddenly came forward, one after another, to reveal Grace's unrequited love for Jacob. Jacob then realized that every annual class reunion had been organized by Grace, just so Grace could catch another glimpse of Jacob. It turned out Grace had given up going to Isabella for Jacob, but was afraid of causing Jacob trouble, so Grace chose not to contact Jacob. Grace's secret affection for Jacob was like a fine, mellow wine. The more Jacob savored it, the richer its essence became. Many people started commenting on Jacob's social media accounts, begging Jacob to take pity on Grace and accept Grace's feelings. Grace, afraid Jacob would feel pressure, secretly went on social media to respond when Jacob wasn't around. The moon doesn't dim its light for those who gaze at it. It shines for itself. Please don't put pressure on Jacob. Jacob doesn't want Jacob's secret affection to become a public nuisance. As Jacob stood at the doorway, watching Grace, weak but diligently typing on the hospital bed, Jacob's heart, tormented and riddled with holes, felt as if it had been nourished by spring rain. 3 months later, Grace recovered and was discharged from the hospital. Grace had to return to Lucas, as many patients were waiting for Grace to perform surgery there. At their parting, Jacob hesitated, but couldn't bring Jacob's self to say what Jacob wanted. Jacob knew that if Jacob didn't take the initiative, this silly girl would never say anything that would put Jacob in an awkward position. Jacob spoke first. Grace. Jacob still has a year and a half before Jacob returns to Lucas. Grace nodded solemnly. Jacob looked into Grace's clear eyes and asked, "Do your words from before about being willing to wait for Jacob still hold true?" Grace paused slightly, then understood what Jacob meant. A look of wild joy spread across Grace's pretty face, but Grace quickly frowned and said cautiously, "Of course they count, but Jacob doesn't want Jacob to be with Jacob out of a sense of obligation." River. Jacob, speechless, gently tapped Grace's forehead, feigning annoyance. Jacob said, "You know Jacob so well, how could you think Jacob would accept a woman for reasons other than falling in love?" Grace looked at Jacob ecstatically, smiling like a silly child. Jacob stepped forward and gently hugged Grace, saying softly, "Goodbye, dear Grace. Remember to miss Jacob. Jacob, we'll miss you too." Jacob turned to leave, but to Jacob's surprise, Grace suddenly cried out excitedly, "River, Jacob won't let you down. Jacob will make you happy forever. Jacob loves you. Jacob loves you. Jacob loves you." The thunderous applause erupted in the airport. Jacob felt Jacob's face burning. This woman, Grace, was truly passionate and bold. Such a declaration, Jacob thought, should have come from Jacob. The man. Jacob ran out of the airport in a hurry, but Grace's smile seemed to echo in Jacob's ears as Jacob exited the airport. The evening breeze caressed Jacob's face, and the moonlight was soft. Jacob raised Jacob's head and looked at the hazy moon, spreading Jacob's arms, embracing Jacob's future.